What is a sourdough starter? Well, I'll tell you. The key to scoring is confidence. You just want to pick a shape and go for it. So although this process might seem like a literal part-time job, I promise you, it's not. Ba-bam! Call my brow! There actually is a purpose to the score. It's not just to make her look so cute. So I'm just gonna go in with 2 hands, grab one side of the dough, stretch it up, and fold it over. Get it centered, and then just flip it over. And just like that, 6.5-ish hours later, we've got an active starter at its peak. Push the dough away, pull it close, away, and close. I'm now gonna mark the level. So that's my 3-day process. For the shaping, I do this part. She's so cute. I love her. Glamour shot 1, 2, 3. Glamour shot 4. Is this too much? I don't care. Now listen, I'm a normal girl. I'm a girl with a normal job. I sit on Zoom all day, every day. And I live in your average city. I live in Chicago. I have a phone that I spend way too much time on. I'm currently watching, like, I don't even know how many TV shows, like at least 5 TV shows. But when I picture my life and when I picture who I am at my core, I'm on an English countryside. I'm living a slow life. I'm borrowing ingredients of things from neighbors, and I'm baking from scratch. Certain things of that life I can achieve right here in my life. Other parts of that life I simply can't achieve while living this life. But one of the things that I have introduced to my normal weekly routine to make me feel like that wholesome girl on the countryside is baking my own homemade sourdough bread. I started baking sourdough bread in December of last year, and I'm proud to say that I have not purchased bread this entire year. Every single piece of bread that Miles and I have ate this year is a slice of sourdough bread that I have made. So honestly, not to brag, but I feel like I've achieved the dream. I'm a normal girl living a normal life who has somehow figured out the sourdough bread thing in a way that works for like this life, but still lets me fantasize about that other one, you know? So last week I asked you guys if anyone was interested in my sourdough routine, and one person did say yes, so ask and you shall receive. Also, speaking of comments, I've had a few people reach out recently and say they just discovered the channel. So I just want to say, if you're new here, thank you for showing up. If you've been here for a while, you're a real one. You've been riding this out with me, and I appreciate that. And if you've been watching for a while but you're not subscribed and you're like, I don't know how I feel about this girl. Should I subscribe? Should I not? Take this as your sign. Just subscribe, you guys. But okay, without further ado, sourdough bread. My sourdough bread routine takes 3 days. Now, when you hear that, it sounds like, whoa, like I thought you were a normal girl. But I'm gonna go through every single day with you and every single time that I'm doing everything, and you'll realize that although it is technically across 3 days, the whole process is across 3 days, you're gonna realize that that sounds intimidating, but it actually really is not, especially when you consider that day 1, today, here's all you have to do. Ready? This is my sourdough starter. His name is Arthur. Everyone take a minute to say hello, Arthur. I just took Arthur out of the fridge. Arthur has been sitting in the fridge since I baked with him last week. I haven't checked in on him in a week. Actually, that's a lie. I did split him in half yesterday to give some of him to a friend. But other than that, I haven't checked in on him in a full week, and he's just been sitting in this jar with a lid just resting on top. It is not completely sealed. It's just sitting on top, just like this. What do you have to say to Arthur?
Arthur, you might not wake up tomorrow because she gives you more attention than she gives to me.
Oh! We have to protect Arthur! Arthur is what happens when Miles doesn't let me get a dog. But I'm wearing him down, you guys. Dog content coming soon! It's not coming super soon, don't get excited. So yes, Arthur is a sourdough starter. What is a sourdough starter? Well, I'll tell ya. I'm not exactly sure. But what sourdough starter replaces is the instant yeast that you would use in a typical bread recipe. If you've ever made a normal loaf of bread before, you'll know that it calls for a little packet of instant yeast. You mix it with some warm water, give it some sugar, and that's the thing that becomes like the fuel for the loaf of bread, and that allows the bread to rise and become a loaf. Instead of using that packet, we're using Arthur. Now, you can create and make your own sourdough starter from scratch. I did try and do that. If you guys have been around for a while, you'll remember that phase. I tried to do that 3 times, and I did fail 3 times. Although now that I understand the process more, looking back, I think the first 2 times I just gave up too soon, but I did fail 3 times. So Arthur is something that I originally purchased from a bakery in Chicago called Mindy's Bakery. You can go there. I don't recommend going on a Sunday like we did because we waited for probably over an hour, but go there on like a weekday, go in the morning, ask for some sourdough starter. She'll pour so much in you know, a little jar, not this jar, but she'll give you a little jar, and then you can start your process. Now, I do recommend just going and buying a starter or getting a starter from a friend, because I will say making a starter from scratch is a little tricky. It requires persistence. And if a failed starter deters you from like trying to make bread, then I don't recommend it at all. If you're committed and you're gonna try and figure this out no matter what, then sure, try and make the starter, fail a few times, and eventually figure it out, eventually have your nice little homemade starter. But if failing at the starter process deters you from doing the sourdough loaf process in general, don't deal with that. Just go to a bakery and buy some. But what I will say is, although my attempt at making my own starter did fail, I didn't end up being able to create an active good starter, but the process in general did teach me the fundamentals about sourdough starter and the fundamentals of the life cycle that I think is important. But this sourdough starter is what's going to allow us to make bread. It's going to be the fuel for the loaf, just like the yeast is, but it's not ready yet. This has been sitting in the fridge, so first of all, it's cold. We don't want to be working with sourdough starter when it's cold. And second of all, it's super inactive. It's been sitting in the fridge just chilling. It's not really awake right now. So for day one, what do? We take it out of the fridge, we put it on the countertop, and what I do is I flip the lid over and put the lid on upside down just to give this more airflow, and then I put it on the counter and I walk away. That's literally the only thing you have to do on day one. Right before you go to bed, take your starter out of your fridge, flip over the lid, put it on the counter. That's it. Day one is literally complete. What this is gonna do is it's gonna bring our starter to room temperature, which is what we want, and it's gonna make our starter very hungry. So a week ago, I fed this starter and I used it to make bread. Whatever starter was left over from the bread, I left it in the jar and I put it in the fridge. So Arthur was kind of recently fed when I put him in the fridge. Arthur has been spending this entire week in the fridge, slowly eating away at his food. Don't worry about food right now. We'll talk about food tomorrow morning. He's been eating away at it super slowly because he's been in the fridge. And when you're in the fridge, you're cold, you're moving slow, you're tired, you're a little dormant. So he's been very slowly in the fridge eating away at whatever food I gave him. Because he's been in the fridge, he's not done eating yet. He's still got some food left. So overnight, while he's at room temperature, while he's got a little more airflow, he's gonna start to wake up a little bit, and he's really gonna start eating all of the food that's left. That will get us to a place where in the morning, he's at room temperature and he's eaten all of his food, so he is super hungry and ready to be fed again. I take Arthur out of the fridge literally right before I go to bed, 10, 10:30, 11. The exact time doesn't matter, but I do it like literally right before I go to bed. And when I say me, I mean Miles. Because what normally happens on day one of my sourdough routine is I get in bed, I might say, hey Miles, can you turn that light off? Or hey, can you grab me, you know, some water? And then he gets everything I need, he gets in bed, and then about 30 seconds later, I'm like, oh shoot, can you also take Arthur out of the fridge? And so he has to get out of bed, go to the kitchen, take Arthur out. So day one usually is completely handled by Miles because I am lazy, but I really shouldn't be this lazy because day one really is this simple. Take the starter out of the fridge, put it on the countertop, and put the lid in a position where it gets a little more airflow. My sourdough routine normally extends from Saturday to Monday. So today is Saturday, I'm about to go to bed. Tomorrow on Sunday morning when I wake up, I will feed my starter and I'll talk you through what that means. Sunday night, I will make the dough and shape the dough and we'll go through that whole process. Then Sunday night, I will stick the loaf in the fridge and it'll cold ferment all overnight. And then Monday morning, I'll take the loaf out of the fridge, I'll score it, and I'll bake it. So that's my 3-day process. This was day one. I'll see you tomorrow for day two. Good morning. It's now time to feed Arthur and then myself. So how do we know that Arthur is hungry and ready to be fed? First of all, we know because we know that the last time we fed him was last week and that he's been out of the fridge for some time now. So we know based on our feeding schedule that he's probably hungry, but also we know that he's hungry because of his texture and because of his smell. Texture wise, you're not really gonna be able to see, but he is super, super runny. If I just kind of like tip this around, the starter is sloshing around in here. He also smells super, super, super sour. For me personally, I think the texture and the smell are the two easiest indicators of the state of your starter. So when you get a starter, Just start smelling it. If it's super, super sour, that means it's hungry and needs to be fed. To feed our starter, we're gonna give it equal parts warm filtered water. Whenever you're dealing with sourdough, only use filtered water, because if you use sink water, the chlorine in sink water can actually kill this little guy. So you wanna make sure you're using filtered water. I just have a big jug of bottled water that I use. So I have my little scale here, and I'm gonna feed him, I'm gonna do 100 grams of warm water. And then I like to give the starter and the warm water just like a little bit of a stir before I put in the flour. I feel like this helps just like incorporate everything together, and it also helps keep the jar clean, because when it's just the water and the starter, I can really kind of like clean the sides off. So now I'm gonna zero this out again. And now we wanna put in the same amount of flour in grams that we put in water. So I put in 100 grams of water, I'm gonna put in 100 grams of flour. This is bread flour, by the way. This is the same flour that we're gonna use to make our bread. They say that using bread flour is good because there is more protein, I think it is. And it just makes it, I don't know, stronger, healthier. Honestly, I don't exactly know why, but I know feeding your starter with bread flour makes it stronger, and I think it just like works compared to all-purpose flour. I don't know if all-purpose flour, if you fed your starter with it, I don't know if it would even work. Now we're gonna give this whole mixture a mix, making sure there are no clumps, stirring completely through. And you want to end up with a consistency that's basically like pancake batter, essentially. Now I'm just gonna clean the sides as best as I can. Get any large chunks. Do not put any of this in or down the sink, especially as this gets, you know, stickier as it becomes more active. You don't want to put this down the sink. That will cause issues. So what I do is I just wipe off pretty much everything off of my spatula. I get it essentially completely clean, and now I'll go ahead and wash it. I'm now gonna mark the level of this mixture with a hair tie, and I'm gonna put the lid back on upside down, just rested on top. We need to feed our starter for 2 reasons. First of all, my bread recipe calls for 100 grams of starter. So the amount of starter that I had this morning was not 100 grams. I needed more than I had this morning. So feeding it increases its volume. But one of the other reasons that we need to feed our starter is that we need to get it into an active state. Just like the instant yeast that you use when you have to mix it with warm water, let it fizz for a little bit and let it get active before you add it to bread, the same sort of process needs to happen for the sourdough starter. You need to get it active before you put it into your dough so that it's active and ready to rise your loaf. So it's 9 a.m. and by feeding this now, I'm giving the hungry starter that was in this jar this morning, I gave it fuel for it to basically eat throughout the day. It's gonna eat the fresh flour and fresh water, and it's basically gonna poop while it does it. It's gonna eat and poop and eat and poop and eat and poop out air. When it does that, it's essentially like Pac-Manning itself and turning the whole mixture into itself. It's basically like taking over this mixture. So the active cultures that were in here basically take over and turn this entire thing into just more starter. And as it eats and as it takes over, it poops out air, which creates bubbles, and the bubbles cause this mixture to rise. Your starter is the most active when it is at its peak, when it's at its tallest point. So it's gonna eat, take over, and it's gonna rise up, and then once all the food in here is kind of like eaten up, it'll slowly fall back down. So you wanna use your starter to make dough when it's as close to the peak as possible. Now, if you use it a little before it's at its peak, totally fine. If you use it a little after, totally fine. But your goal should be to use your starter when it's at its peak. So every starter is different. Everyone's home environment is different. So you can't just go online and see what one girl does and say like, oh, hers said it would, you know, double in 4 hours. So I'm gonna make mine and I'm gonna expect it to double in 4 hours. You can't do that. On average, a sourdough starter will double and be its most active after about 6 hours. But every starter is on its own timeline. It could happen in 4 hours, it could happen in 10 hours. You gotta just kind of keep an eye on it, and that's why we feed it in the morning. That's why I took it out of the fridge last night, got it super hungry overnight, And now I'm feeding it in the morning so that this afternoon, usually it's around like 3 p.m.-ish for me. So hopefully around 2 p.m., 3 p.m., it'll be ready for me to use so that I can make dough this evening. From the very start, I have been putting my sourdough starter in the oven the oven is not on, but I put it in the oven with just the oven light on, and that creates just a warm enough environment for this really to get like supercharged. When your starter is warm, it really activates little cultures in there and they just like go to town, they feast. So I have found that putting it in my oven really works, but be careful because again, everyone's home is different. Some oven lights will make the oven way, way, way too hot for your starter. So you're gonna have to do some trial and error, but this is just what I do. I'm feeding at 9 a.m., putting it in the oven with just the light on, and by around 2 p.m. or 3 p.m., it'll probably be at its peak and it'll be time for me to make the dough. Day 2 is definitely the most involved, but so far it's been super easy. I woke up whenever I wanted to and put equal parts bread flour and slightly warm filtered water. I did microwave the water for about 30 seconds. I never measure how much starter I start with in the jar. If I have a ton, like if I had this much starter left over, I might discard it to about half just because we don't want to end up with so much starter. If you start with a lot of starter, you're gonna end up with a lot of starter. And because I only need 100 grams, I don't want to be making like vats of starter. So that's why you do usually like discard and start with a little. But because I started with so much, such a small amount to begin with, I didn't need to discard, I could just feed. I recommend not getting caught up too much in how much starter you're keeping and just focus on feeding it equal parts flour and water, and focus on the texture being like pancake, and focus on the smell. You'll notice this smells pretty much like fresh flour. It honestly barely has any sourness to it. So we went from liquidy, super sour smelling to super thick pancake batter, super fresh flour smelling. It's been about 2 hours. We're starting to get some bubbles in here, if you could see, but hasn't risen yet. We're at the 4-hour mark now, and you'll see we do have a little bit of growth here, but still not that much going on. Ba-bam! Calm brown! If any of you guys watch Summer House and get that reference, let me know.
Video.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, but we are 6 hours later, and it looks like the starter has pretty much doubled, if not a little more. And if you look at the top, it's almost doming a little bit, which could mean that it's at its peak. So what I'm gonna do to just like check on it to see if it's at its peak is I'm gonna move the hair tie up to the top like so. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave this for like 30 more minutes, maybe 45 more minutes, and I'm gonna see if it climbs above this hair tie or if it starts to fall below. If it falls below, that means it's hit its peak and it's starting to come back down. So this is a method that I like to use to just like fully check and see if we're at the peak moment. But this is looking good 6 hours later. And just like that, 6.5-ish hours later, we've got an active starter at its peak.
Oh my God.
I know, it
grows
grows.
so much.
Because I fed it. So as you can see, it grew even a little more, but it's no longer domed at the top, which means it's actually starting to like deflate a little bit. So we caught it actually like right at its peak. Now we have to check in with texture and with smell. Texture-wise, it's pretty jiggly and it's got a bunch of bubbles. And smell-wise, I think it's an amazing smell. It's like the perfect mixture between like sour, but still like freshness. Like it's almost like a fresh sour. I don't know how to explain it, but once you get the starter at its peak, smell this smell and remember this smell, and this will help you, kind of figure out if it's at its peak next time. So this is all ready to bake with. But as I was waiting for this starter to rise and to become active and to hit its peak, I did start editing this very video, and we are already at I think 15 minutes. Your girl has a lot to say, and I was thinking should I cut it down and then just keep going? But I think everything that I'm saying, although I am long-winded, I think this is helpful, and I would rather give you guys everything and hope that this actually helps rather than cut out stuff just to make the video, shorter. But I also don't want to post a 40-minute video about sourdough starter, because the whole point of this video is to make the whole process seem not intimidating. And if I post a 40-minute video, that's gonna be so intimidating. So I think what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna split this video into 2 parts. This first part is gonna be this video, and this video, as you've seen, is all about the whole starter process. Getting the starter going and getting it to its active state. And then literally right now, I'm gonna press end on this clip start a new clip, and the next part of the video will start right here, and I will go through the whole dough making process. I'll bring you through the whole bulk fermentation process, shaping, cold fermentation, and then I'll pick up the video tomorrow for day 3 where I score the loaf and bake the loaf. So if you guys made it to this part in the video, and if you're enjoying this, and if you're excited for part 2, go ahead and subscribe, you guys. Come on, just do it. And if you have any questions, let me know. I really, really hope that this has been helpful. And I really, really hope so far I've proven the point that this is not as complicated as it seems. There's a lot of time involved, but as you've seen so far, most of it is inactive time. Like, yes, technically, this has been going for 6 hours today, but other than when I mixed it this morning, I haven't done anything with it. Miles and I grocery shopped, I edited this vlog. Like, I've been living my life. So although this process might seem like a literal part-time job, I promise you, it's not. If you take away one thing from this video, take away this. Sourdough bread is not as complicated as people make it seem. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you're having a good day. I hope you're having a good week, and I'll see you guys next time for part 2.